Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. It is Toxico Cereal, and welcome back to another Brawl Stars video. Today, we're going to be doing a bit of an interesting video. Everybody knows, well, I hope everybody knows, about the new modifier called Gadgets Galore in Ranked. Basically, how that modifier works is you have unlimited gadget uses. However, there's a 15-second cooldown, which I think actually ruins the whole point of the Gadgets Galore. I think that's way too long. Hopefully, they'll tweak that in the future. But today, we're not talking about Gadgets Galore. We're talking about what if supers galore existed. What the hell do I mean by that? I mean every brawler has unlimited supers. No cooldown, no nothing. It is unlimited supers. Just think of Stu's mutation. When Stu had his mutation, he would have had unlimited supers. Think about that on every brawler. Now, just a disclaimer, we're not talking about hypercharges here, because that, I think, would just unbalance it a little bit too much compared to the brawlers that have it and do not have it. So hyperchargers will be 100% disabled in this mode, or they will charge normally like they normally do. But no, they will not have infinite hypercharge supers. It will just be infinite supers. So we're going to be going through every single brawler on who the hell would break the game the most. Because 90% of these, let's be real, would completely shatter the game. And yeah, let's just get into it, because this is going to be such a hard video to rank the brawlers, because you have to legitimately logically think about how the hell you can counter some of these. So starting off with Shelly, you have infinite supers. Bam, bam, bam. Tanks are screwed. However, the biggest down back to this is just the range. It's got good range, but you have to be right next to it to receive full value. And I think with this super, you're not going to be able to close the gap as easily, because you have the star power, which will definitely help, but I think just mobility is going to be the biggest key to a lot of these supers. So Shelly will definitely have an impact on it, but I don't think it's completely game-breaking like some of these we will go through. So for me, I think it's just a B tier. Next up, we've got Colt. Colt will have infinite wall breaks and just pretty much in a lot of range, but like I said, the problem with Shelly's is not a lot of mobility with this super, and it takes a hot minute to fire all of his projectiles. You got to keep in mind, his super damage isn't insanely powerful, and he doesn't have the hypercharge to help him, but it's constant DPS, and it'll be very hard to deal with that. So I'm going to also put him in the B tier with Shelly. Next up, we've got Brock. And Brock just has a raining barrage of rockets all around the map. And it's not that hard to dodge. It does do a lot of damage, but like I said, it's not a mobility super. So Brock is still vulnerable once using the super. So if anything, I think this was just a tad bit worse than Shelly and Colt. So I'll put it in the C tier. Next, we've got Jesse's. And Jesse's, honestly, I think spawners are going to struggle in this. And you might think, what? How is that possible? Just the amount of pressure with everybody else's supers just leaves the spawner to pretty much be vulnerable. Like, you can keep throwing it out, but a lot of the supers can pierce, and just you're gonna die. So honestly, I think this is F tier. I'm not gonna lie. This might be a little bit harsh, but like, Jesse's gonna keep throwing out scrappies, and I feel like it's just gonna repeatedly die, and everybody's just gonna pierce through it and kill Jesse along with it. So same thing kind of goes with Nita. I think Nita has a little bit more value because it'll actually chase down, but it suffers the same problem with the Jesse, as it's a spawner, and that's really the only thing that's going to happen. I just think it's just going to get out DPS'd. That's just my problem. So I'm also putting it in the F tier. Next up, we've got Dynamik's, and Dynamik's super is so deadly. The problem is it's very hard to hit with mobility supers, and a lot of supers have mobility. So just think about it. It's going to be very hard to hit this super. So it's kind of similar to Brock's in a way. So I'm going to put it in the C tier. Next up, we have El Primo. And El Primo is got to be one of the most broken ones, in my opinion. The fact that he's in the air, jumps, and pretty much puts the brawler in a permanent stun lock because of the knockback just leads to some brokenness. The problem is you do have to get in range first, which might seem like a challenge, but keep in mind, you're in the air when you're using your super, so you're going to be able to close the gaps so easily and just continuously pounce and put the brawlers in a stun lock. So for me, it's going to be the first A tier. I don't think it's S tier. Next up, we've got Bulls, and Bulls, for me, is easily F tier. I think Bull super straight up sucks. Like, With a Stomper gadget, it will definitely help, but it's not gadgets galore, it's supers galore. Bull super sucks. End of story. Next up, we have Rico. And Rico's very similar to Colt Super, so it's going to also be in the B tier. It does have more range and deal more damage, but it's the same problem with Colts, is it's just straight up the mobility issue. Next up, we've got Barley's. Barley's is very, very good. It provides range, but the problem is I just don't think the DPS is there. It's a very slow, it's a very map-dependent super, which is good for like Hot Zone and Heist, for example, but he's just going to get overwhelmed by anything aggressive way too easily, so it's going to be in the D tier. Next up, we've got Pocos, which has to be an S tier one, without a doubt. He is infinitely healing 4,200 HP himself and his teammates. You can't kill him. It's impossible. Even if you get him in somewhat of a stun lock, if you can't get him stunned, he will infinitely heal. Same thing goes with Mortis. You literally can't kill him if he keeps spamming supers on you. You can't. It is impossible. Next up, we have Bows, and if Bow had infinite mines, it would be insanely strong. However, once you throw one super down, the previous one disappears, and that completely contradicts it, so it's an F tier one. I'm sorry, Bow fans. Next up, we've got Spikes, and it's just infinite slow pads, which deal damage, so just think of an infinite slow area. Now, it's very good for control like Barley's, but I feel like it suffers the same issue. He's way too vulnerable to any aggressive super. So for me, it's going to be in the C tier. I think it provides a little more value than Barley's, but it's just not as meaningful. Next up, we've got Crows. Infinite mobility and a lot of damage. You're never going to be able to miss. So I think it's just very insane that Crow will be in the air. Pretty much unkillable. Just chopping out damage over time. So it's going to be in the A tier. Next up, we've got Pipers. And Piper just jumps in the air, similar to Crow, leaving bombs. The problem with Crows, Pipers compared to Crows, is it only leaves it after she jumps, not where she lands. That's why Crow thrives. Piper, I think, will suffer. Now, she will be very hard to kill with her being in the air, but when she lands, she's very vulnerable. So I think that's the biggest drawback to it. So I'll put it in the C tier. Next up, we've got Pam. Pam just continuously throws out a super. The biggest problem, though, is it does instantly heal, but it's not that much, and it's a turret. So, like I said, spawners are going to suffer. Now, I think it's a little bit better compared to the other spawners, but it's just the healing is not enough to provide with a constant DPS. So for me, it's got to go in the C tier. I don't think it's that good. Next up, we have Teras super. It has to be S tier, in my opinion. The fact that you can constantly keep throwing portals and pretty much indefinitely stun lock the Brawler, yeah, if you get caught by Teras super, you're screwed. End of story. The only way you're going to be able to counter this is if you get Tera before she catches you. Because once you're caught in the super, you're cooked. Nothing you can do. Next up, we got Daryl's. And Daryl will be infinitely rolling, which is very good. The problem is the roll doesn't deal that much damage. It does help with a stun lock, and it's insane for mobility, but I think just overall, the DPS will catch up to him, and he's just going to be very hard to kill with. So I will put it in the B tier, though, just because it does give him just so much mobility. Next up, we have Penny, and Penny definitely is an F tier one, because the turret will never hit the opponent, pretty much, and you're basically just throwing turrets. I think with the Master Blaster Star power, it might be better, but I just still don't see much value. Next up, we got Frank, and he will have... Think about it. If he can get the stun off, it's broken, because it's an infinite stun lock. You can't escape it. Once you get hit once, you're cooked. The biggest problem, though, is it's just too hard to hit Frank's super, so that's just the easiest and biggest drawback by far with him, is that it's just very challenging to hit a super, and with the mobility supers, you're never going to be able to hit it. So I think just for that reason alone, I'm going to put it in the C tier. If you hit the stun, it's S tier, but it's just hitting that stun. Next up, we've got Leon. And Leon, think about it. Infinite invisibility. You could be basically is hypercharged, pretty much. However, the biggest drawback is if you know where Leon's at, he can't really do anything. He has Invisi-Heal, so he will benefit from that a lot. However, his super by itself doesn't deal any damage. So I think that's the biggest problem by far. Though, if you can't find Leon, he will be invisible the whole game. Just being strategic. But I think it'll only really benefit him with gem grab, where he can pick up the gems and pretty much hide. So I think it's still a B tier one. Next up, you have Gene. And you would think about it, technically getting pulled by Gene's hand is a stun lock, and he does benefit from his star power. However, if you pull a Super Shelly in there, you're going to die. So you have to be careful with who you pull, because you really can't stun lock with Gene like you can with the other brawlers. So I'm going to put in C tier, because you still have Spirit Slap, which does 2,000 damage per hit. And it's pretty much impossible to miss a Gene pull every once in a while. Next up, you've got Carl. And Carl will be spinning. However, the biggest problem with Carl is knockback, and I feel like the majority of the supers have a knockback, so I think that's the biggest problem with Carl. He's really never going to get in his super that often, so I'll put it in the C tier as well. Next up, we have Rosa, and Rosa is insane because she has a permanent 70% shield. It's going to be so hard to kill her, especially when you have a brawler like Poco. How the hell are you going to kill her? You're not. I don't think it's as good as Poco, but a 70% shield through the whole game with a healing star power is kind of broken if you really think about it. Next up, we have BB, and BB's just going to be throwing her bubbles all over the map. The problem is the damage isn't 100% great, but it's guaranteed damage, and it could lead to very, very dangerous situations if you don't have the mobility to kill BB and dodge her constant bubbles. I think throughout the match, it'll just become super overwhelming for the enemy team. So honestly, I'm going to put this one in A tier. Next up, we have Tick, and Tick is another spawnable similar to Nita, where once he throws his Tick head, and if there's one out there, it will explode, but it will despawn the current one. So just think about anything piercing, and a lot of the supers can pierce and just melt through the Tick head. So I think it's the biggest drawback by far, and it's got to be in the D tier. Next up, we have 8-Bit. 8-Bit has an infinite booster, which, and the certain game mode, that could be very devastating. But at the same time, right, you have other supers which just will tread. And like I said, spawners are going to struggle. So I'm sorry, 8-Bit fans. It has to be F tier. Next up, we've got Sandy. Infinite sandstorms. The whole map will be covered in a sandstorm. And think about it. You have the Rude Sand star powers. You will always know where the enemy team is. And you will always be invisible. So it's pretty much Leon, but 1,000 times better. So for me, I must put this S tier because it's just going to be so incredibly broken. Next up, we've got Ems. An infinite slow around her will make it impossible for tanks. The problem is getting in range. Yeah, you literally can't because you have to catch the opponents off guard. And even if you do, you're going to die to a powerful super from Shelly, from Rico, from literally anybody else that can shred you to pieces with 3 supers because Ems' super damage isn't that much. So for me, it's D tier. Next up, we've got B. And B against another brawler that will benefit so much against tanks. But the problem is, let's take a brawler like El Primo. El Primo's just going to jump on you over and over. Your super doesn't deal that much damage. It slows the enemy, but that's kind of it. So another D tier one in my opinion. Next up, we've got Max, and Max has infinite speed for the team. However, no damage, and mobility is good, but Max's super doesn't deal any damage. Now, for team synergies, this could be insanely powerful, but by Max on herself is just terrible. So I have to balance that out, so I'm going to put it in the C tier. For team synergy, oh, that'll be broken. Next up, you've got Mr. P, and another spawnable one. Most supers pierce, and the fact you could have infinite porters, however, once you throw a super down and you throw another super down, the previous porter will despawn, and that's the biggest drawback by far, so it's F tier. Next up, we've got Jackie. Now, Jackie's an interesting one, because her super by herself sucks, but she technically can put people in a stun lock by getting in a super. The problem, getting in range. Yeah, that's the biggest drawback. You're never going to get in range with Jackie. Next up, we've got Sprout, and this could be a devastating one because think about it. Sprout can have multiple walls on the map. And if it keeps throwing walls nonstop, even against piercing and wall breaks, I just think the walls will overwhelm. So I honestly think this could be an extremely underrated one. So I'm going to put it in the A tier. Next up, we've got Gale. And Gale has one thing that makes this absolutely S tier. And that is his blustery blow star power. If you hit an opponent against a wall, they're dead. 100% of the time. You cannot escape it. If you get hit by a Gale Super by Blustery Blow, you're dead. You can't counter it. It's impossible. Gale Super already has insane range. Yeah, you're just dead. Don't even try. The game is over. You're gonna get cooked. No shot. Next up, we've got my favorite brawler, Nani. And I'm sorry, it's F tier. And let me tell you why. You're gonna be stationary, throwing out peeps that most of the time don't even one-shot the brawler as is. And you really can't spam Nani's super like you can with other brawlers, because you have to wait until the previous super expires. And by the time you're doing that, the enemy will be approaching you, getting ready to kill you. And it's just, overall, just this is not going to work. Next up, you've got Surge. And think about it. You're in the air, jumping, knocking back. In the air, jumping, knocking back. In the air, jumping, knocking back. And that is just a repetitive cycle. Over and over again until the enemy's dead. It's pretty much a infinite stun lock like Gale's. You literally cannot kill Surge when he's in the freaking air. The only way you'll be able to counter him is if he misses your jump. That's the only way. So for me, it has to be an S tier, because how the hell are you going to kill Surge when he's constantly jumping in the air, knocking you back? You would have to pray that he messes up. Next up, you've got Colette. And Colette is similar because she's got the push it star power to put you in a stun lock. However, there is one drawback, is when you push the opponent back, they can super you back, and that will pretty much get you killed a lot. And it's also very hard to get decent value from it. So the stun lock potential is there. I just don't think it's going to be as great as a brawler like Surge. Next up, we've got Amber, and it's infinite fire, infinite puddles, infinite everything. Yeah, good, right? Wrong. Because aggression will still overwhelm her. She does have dancing flames, but again, it's his super galore, not gadgets. And you also can't... Healing will overwhelm that, because the damage isn't that great from Amber's super. So honestly, I think this one's not that great. I'll put it in the D tier. Next up, you've got Lou. And Lou's very similar to Sandy. An infinite ice rink around the map. The only way you're going to be able to counter it is with mobility. And you really can't, because by the time you'll be frozen. S tier, guaranteed. Next up, we've got Byron. And Byron is a very underrated one in my opinion, because not only does his super deal damage, it also heals himself. So if he gets an aggro, he could constantly throw out supers to heal himself and damage his enemy. And if you think about that, it's going to make Byron almost impossible to kill. So for me, it's another S tier. Wow. Next up, you've got Edgar. And if you think about it, Edgar just infinitely jumps. Now, with the 1-star power, yes, he could deal damage, but most of the time, you're not going to land with that star power, and by the time he does land, if you got a brawler like Shelly or a brawler with a knockback, you're just going to kill him. So, honestly, I think this one's not that great. D tier. Next up, we've got Colonel Ruffs, and Ruffs has a super that does knockback, and you theoretically could put in the stun lock, deals a decent amount of damage. I think the problem, though, is the knockback can be a bit unpredictable, and it's not that hard to dodge Ruffs' super. He can give a power-up very easily for the team, but the power-up isn't even that great anymore. So, but I'll put it in the C tier. Next up, we've got Stu, and everybody knows this one because it's been in the game before. Stu had infinite supers with his mutation, and it was very, very, very broken. It was one of the best mutations in the game. The problem here is every brawler has infinite supers, and Stu, yes, he will do very good, especially with the Gasso Heal star power, or he can use Zero Drag and dodge like crazy. The problem is, he eventually will get overwhelmed, because every other super will just counter him sometime. Somehow, some way, he's going to get countered out. So, I think that's the biggest drawback for me. So, even though the mutation was broken, I don't think it's as powerful as it is. Next up, we've got Belle. I'm sorry, Belle, it's F tier. I'm sorry. It's not that much damage from her super, and it just gives them a mark. That deals more damage. It could be good in team synergy, but it's just not powerful enough to compete with the meta. Next up, you've got Squeak. Squeak will have infinite map control. However, he's still very vulnerable to aggression, and aggression definitely is going to destroy him. So for me, it's not F tier, it's going to be D tier. Next up, we have Buzz. Oh, Buzz. Infinite stun lock. Do we need to talk about Buzz? He super stuns enemies on hits. Once you get hit by Buzz, it's the same thing as Gale's star power, Blustery Blow, if he has infinite supers. You're dead. You literally cannot kill him. If he gets you stunned, you're screwed. End of story. Game over. Next up, we've got Griff. And Griff be tossing his freaking money all over the place. However, it does deal a decent amount of damage and has good range. I just think that the biggest problem is going to be outranging him and putting him in a stun lock. Because once he gets put in a stun lock, he's cooked. So overall, though, it's still constant DPS, so I'll put it in the B tier. Next up, we've got Ashes, and again, it's another spawner. Piercing will destroy it. End of story. It's F tier. I'm sorry, Ash mains. Next up, we've got Meg, and Meg, depending on the form, obviously, it's going to be Rob form, where she can infinitely swipe, dealing a decent amount of damage. The problem is getting in range, because Meg is not going to be able to get in range before she's taken out of her mecha. However, though, once she is taken out of mecha, she can go right back in it, because she will always have super available. So, you literally have to kill Meg before she gets back in the mecha, and that could be very challenging to do, because she will, as soon as she gets taken out of mech, she's going to jump right back in it, so you have to kill her. That little window is the main reason why she definitely has to be at least in the B tier. I don't think it's crazy broken, because I feel like most of the time with the supers, she won't even be able to get in because of the knockback, but she also will die because a lot of supers deal a lot of damage. Next up, we've got Lola, and Lola is another spawner that she will always have her ego, though. The problem, though, is that her ego will probably die along with her with it. So I don't think it's as bad as some of the other spawners, but it's got to be in the D tier. Next up, we've got Grom, and Grom has a very powerful super that deals a lot of damage, and you can break open the map a lot. The problem is, again, he's vulnerable to aggression. So, for that reason, it's going to be in the C tier. Next up, we've got Fang. Fang. So Fang will be zooming around the map, chaining between opponents indefinitely. I just think in the right scenario, this could be incredibly broken. I just think those scenarios are very rare, because you could indefinitely spam that super button until the brawler is dead. But if you go into a brawler like Shelly, you're gonna die. So I think for the most part, though, you're gonna get insane value. So it's gonna be A tier. Now for Eve. Eve is an interesting one, because she is a spawner. However, she's different, because you want to play her spawner so passively, and if the brawler does not have a pierce, good night, you're screwed. But I feel like majority of the supers can pierce, so I think that's the biggest drawback. Even main attacks can pierce on a lot of the brawlers, so I think that's the biggest drawback. But just imagine with the quadruplets mythic gear, just the amount of hatchlings on the ground, because Eve can just constantly make it rain hatchlings. So, for me, I think it's a good spawner. I think it's the best one for spawners, but I just think it's just the very correct scenario. The brawler has to have no way of piercing through those hatchlings. If that's the case, it's going to be at least a B tier. So, next up, we've got, well, it would be S tier, but with all the piercing, it's B tier. Next up, we've got Janet, and Janet is similar to Crow and Piper, where she is in the air the whole time, dropping bombs. The biggest thing, though, for Jen is the way you use her super. You're going to be in the air, dropping bombs, and then you're going to go back to safety, then go back up in the air, and so on. And you can keep doing that cycle over and over until you are satisfied. I just think the synergy will make sense the most with Janet, because at least you know you will land in a safe spot because you're in the air controlling your super. So I think that makes it so underrated in my opinion. Now the damage is weak and it's very hard to hit her super, but I think just the right synergy definitely will make this an A tier one. Next up we've got Bonnie. You can jump in, go back into Clyde, jump in, go back into Clyde. The biggest problem though is both forms kind of suck, and you're jumping into a brawler that will probably delete you with their super anyways. So I think this one kind of sucks for Bonnie. I'm sorry, going in the D tier. Next up, we've got Otis, and common sense will tell you this is incredibly broken, because once you get hit by Otis's super, goodbye. You can't do literally anything. The only thing you can do is try and run. But Otis is just going to keep using your super, and he's probably going to use the star power that gives an extra second. So you have 4 seconds to try and get the hell away before Otis hits you with another super. And if he does, yeah, because his super deals damage. Eventually, you're going to die. If you get hit by Otis' super, see ya. Adios, muchacho. You ain't going anywhere. Next up, we have Sam, and Sam's logically would be insanely powerful. However, the biggest drawback for me, though, is that just he has to get in range, and it's just a very hit or miss. Now, it will be great if he throws a super badly. It's just that every other super is going to delete him, so I think that just makes it the biggest drawback. So for me, it's gonna be a C tier. Honestly, no, I'm putting it in the D tier. I'm not gonna lie. I just think Sam's gonna get no value, even though he can constantly throw out a super, bring it back, throw out a super. I just think over time it's just not gonna work. Next up we have Gus. Gus has an infinite shield. Now it's not like Poco where he can infinitely heal. But Gus, think about it. The fact that he can spam his super, I don't know if his super can stack. If it can, it's 100% S tier. But he's gonna have a shield pretty much the whole time. The only way you can kill him is by putting him in a stun lock. So for me, I have to put it at least in the A tier. Next up, we have Buster. And Buster, it has to be S tier. The fact that you can just put down your barrage and block all incoming projectiles forever is insane. Like, the only way you're going to be able to kill Buster is if you hit him on the right angle, which most of the time, the way Buster is played, you can't. Buster will run at you, try to block all your projectiles. The only actual way you're going to counter him is with artillery, but I feel like a lot of the artillery brawlers suck, and majority of the supers, like Surge would kick his ass, obviously, but just think about it. Brawlers with no artillery, they're screwed. You're never going to be able to kill Buster with this stupid shield. Next up, we have Gray. Another one I have to put in S tier. Infinite teleportation. And you have healing. The chances of you hitting Gray are basically zero. Even if you had, like, Gale, Gray will just teleport around the map and dodge everything, poke you every once in a while, teleport back away, come back, poke you again until you're dead. So I don't see how this one can be any lower than S tier. Next up, we've got Mandy. Mandy throws big, powerful candies, and you're going to hit them once in a while. If they don't have a healing source, they're probably going to die almost all of the time. And if they're not aggression with an airborne like El Primo, they're going to die because you're not going to be able to get up to Mandy before you're already almost dead. And then she can finish you off with a one-man attack. So I don't think it's completely game-breaking, but definitely A tier for me. Next up, we've got Chester, and Chester's a bit of an interesting one. Chester has 5 supers. Now, if it was just the stun super, S tier, guaranteed, because it's an infinite stun lock if you hit it. The problem, though, is a lot of his supers are hit or miss, because you've got this Poison Star power, which is alright, but then you've also got the slow one, which sucks, the jawbreaker one, or whatever the big bomb is, it's alright, and then the healing one, which is good for healing, but most of the time you won't need it. Yeah, after that, I'd definitely say Chester. He's just a 2 RNG based, so I'm putting it in the C tier, because he does have some great supers for an insane stun lock and decent damage. Next up, we have RT. In RT, he has healing with going back into a super, but I think overall, once he put his supers down, he can deal a lot of damage and deal with both. I just think that overall, it kind of just won't matter because he's going to get out DPS'd anyways. So for me, I'm going to put it in the D tier. It might be a little harsh. Next up, we've got Willow. And Willow is an interesting one because she can use her super indefinitely by putting people into her mind. The problem is she's too vulnerable when she has somebody supered, and you can't use the brawler that you supered, so it doesn't really help in my opinion. So I'm putting it in the F tier. If you could use the enemy brawler super, then it would be S tier easily. But I just think when you capture somebody and they just lock onto Willow, they're gonna just kill Willow. So it just doesn't make sense to me. Next up, we've got Maisy. And Maisy's another brawler similar to like Gale, where you can get the stun lock off if you hit the brawler. You can just constantly knock them back. I think the biggest problem though with Maisy is that the range is a bit of an issue. Now she has the gadget to help, and her super is quite large, so I think that's the only drawback to this definitely stun locking super. So I'm gonna put it in the A tier, could be S tier. Next up we have Hank. Hank does have healing with his super, which definitely will benefit him because he can just spam that super out. However, though, his super kind of sucks as is, so he's pretty much only going to be getting the healing. So, however, he does heal a lot. So for that reason, I got to put it in the S tier because it's kind of like Poco in a way, but he can also damage the enemy. So, next up we have Cordelius, and it has to go in S tier. Why does it have to be an S tier? Because if you get somebody in the Shadow Realm, they can't super themselves, and you can indefinitely trap a Brawler in the Shadow Realm until you kill them. And most of the time when Cordelius puts somebody in the Shadow Realm, Cordelius wins that engagement. So this is probably one of the best counters to everything. So next up we have Doug, S tier. The only way to kill Doug is by putting him in a stun lock before he can get a super off. But most of the time, he'll have his super ready. So it doesn't matter. He's just going to spam his super or run up the map. Oh, I got super. I'm just going to respawn. Just keep doing that process until he gets what the hell he wants. So just overall, it's broken. Next up, we have Pearls. And Pearl's super kind of sucks because against aggression, good. The problem, though, is nobody gets next to Pearl anyways. So it doesn't matter. So it's F tier. Sorry. Next up, we have Chuck, and if you think about it, Chuck's in Heist, he's super broken. However, it's not that hard to dodge Chuck's post, and he does have the damage reduction, but he's got to line up his post first, then he can start going Havoc crazy, which I think will be very good, but like I said, it's too easy to dodge his post, so I think that's the biggest drawback. So I'm going to put it, though, in the B tier, because it's still insane map movement. You just have to be stupid enough to walk on his post area. Next up, we have Charlie. And S tier. It's Otis' super, basically, but you can't even move. By the time you get out of the cocoon, you're going to get put right back in the cocoon. So I don't know what to tell you. You can't escape. Next up, we have Miko. And Miko is an interesting one because Miko is in the air for so long, comes down, deals damage, then can go right back up in the air. The biggest drawback, though, is that it takes way too long to get in the air in the first place. So I think because he's in the air for too long, and he can't really stun lock opponents, it's got to go in the D tier. I'm sorry. Next up, we've got Kit, S tier. Why? Infinite stun lock. Hello. Next up, we've got Larry and Laurie. And a bunch of Lauries. Sounds good, but again, it's a spawner. And again, piercing destroys spawners. Now, Larry does have a very powerful attack on his own. So I think it's still going to be a better spawner than the other ones. But I just don't think spawners are going to thrive. So I'm putting it in the D tier. Might be harsh. Next up, we've got Angelo. Angelo has infinite healing, infinite poison arrows, and infinite map control pretty much. Because they deal a lot of damage by walking over him. However, I think just the DPS over time is going to get up to him because he doesn't have a crazy DPS. He can technically heal, but he can get put in a stun lock. And that's the biggest drawback for me. So I'm going to put it in the B tier, though, because it has good potential. Next up, you've got Melody. And if you think about it already, Melody feels like she always has super wearable. And all she does is just dash, dash, dash. She can put in a stun lock. She's going to get out DPS. She's good for mobility, but she has no form of healing, so if she gets damaged over time, she's eventually going to die. And even though it might seem smart to just try and maneuver, it's going to be very challenging to do that. But I can see the potential, though, with Melody, so I'm going to put her in the C tier. Next up, we've got Lily. And Lily super doesn't deal much damage. Now, against anything that can't destroy you in your face in 2 seconds or put you in a stun lock, it's going to be insane, but I feel like there's just too many knockbacks and getaway items that are just going to make Lily way too easy to counter. So I'm going to put her in the C tier. Next up, we've got Draco, and Draco will constantly be healing from his star power and going into Draco form. The problem is, though, once he's in it, he doesn't really need to use it again, and he's going to get out DPS'd. So, and yeah, that's kind of it. So honestly, it's a D tier one in my opinion. Next up, we've got Barry, and Barry has a good super. He can constantly be healing his teammates over and over and over. The problem is he cannot heal himself, and when he plays aggressive, that's way too risky because he can't heal himself from his super unless he stands on it, but using his super doesn't give him any healing. So that's the only drawback in my opinion. So that's going to be C tier though. Next up, you've got Clancy against tanks. Wow, that's insanely broken. Wow. Especially stage 3 Clancy, which if he has infinite supers, he's getting to stage 3 in no time. But it's got to be against tanks. Otherwise, he struggles to get in range, which is Clancy's biggest problem, though. So I'm going to put him in B tier because his super is insanely powerful, but it's just a problem that he needs to get in range. Next up, we've got Mo, S tier. Think about it. With a knockback, the damage, it's an infinite stun lock because you can be underground, pop up, knock them back. Go back into normal form, super again, come up, knock them back. You cannot dodge Mo's super when he's auto-aiming because it's freaking way too fast. So, S tier. And finally, Kenji, also S tier. He's in the air, slash, slash, bam, gets back in the air, slash, slash. He heals from that, and he also deals 5,200 damage if he hits both. How the hell are you going to kill him? You literally can't. But that's going to be it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed. I will see you next time.